Hello and welcome to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. First of all, happy 2021! Technically, this is supposed to be the December 2020 episode of the Kemetic How-To Guide, but 2020 was 2020, and so here we are. It's January, and we're getting a fresh start. The plus side is that means I'll be working on another episode soon, so we can kind of cram 2 episodes into 1 month, hopefully. So, recently one of our regular viewers sent me some really cool stuff. Actually, he's sent me several things. I'll probably have more things to talk about later, but these are called cantaritos. And I got some in 2 sizes, and they did not come with these little cocktail umbrellas. That came afterwards. These are unglazed Mexican ceramic jars, and my viewer sent them to me because they resemble, as he pointed out, certain forms of pre-dynastic Egyptian pottery, and he was kind enough to send me examples and pictures. First of all, I want to say thank you again for sending these things. It's great. It gives me a wonderful topic here. Around the same time that I got these, I also picked up a very good book, and I'll be talking about that next episode. This is a very nice reprint of the Book of the Dead. Specifically, the images are from the Papyrus of Ani that was originally published by Budge. This has very nice color reproductions of the original. Some of them are gatefolds. And they did this so that they could keep the text and the images more or less unified, something that, wasn't, the importance was not realized earlier on. And that's something I can explain more about in an upcoming episode. But what really caught my eye, and it's right here on the cover, is this beautiful picture of an altar that Ani and his wife, Tutu, have set up, in this case to the god Sokar. But there's several examples in here. So I had this perfect combination of ancient depictions and modern items that are meant to evoke ancient objects. And so that kind of got me to thinking. Because you see, being pagan Reconstructionists, many of us have encountered somewhere along the way somebody who is a hardcore Reconstructionist and will flip out if you even mention offering something that is not historically documented or non-traditional, let's say. Now, I've already pointed out in the past how impractical that kind of approach can be. But since we have a few things to go on, let's see what happens if we deliberately try to go down this rabbit hole and go total recon. So as our guide, I'm going to use these images of ancient altars as the Egyptians themselves imagined they should look. Of course, because this is sort of like the ancient equivalent of cartoons now. This was drawn and it's fairly stylized, and you have to learn how they stylize things in order to kind of interpret what they're trying to show you. But if you can kind of start to figure that out, it can tell us a lot about what it is that they thought was appropriate to put on an altar in front of, the gods. So let's take a look at what was done then, what we can do now, and what may not be practical or even possible. Now, first off, about these cantaritos. I learned some really interesting things playing with these cantaritos. For one, the feeling of them, they feel very rough, but because it's unglazed, if you want to use it, you have to soak it in water first. Right from the start, I learned something interesting. For one, let's see if the camera can actually pick this up. Now, I have here a big container of water, and when I start to soak this one in it, I don't know if the microphone on this camera can pick it up, but it starts to make this fizzing kind of sound as the ceramic starts to absorb the water, and of course it's, all the little air bubbles in the ceramic are getting filled with water, so that's probably what's causing the fizzing sound. Also, because this ceramic is porous, it cools the water by evaporation. And as a matter of fact, if you happen to be a kind of a Weather Channel junkie, like Darren and I tend to be sometimes, on like these survival shows that they have with, the Creek Stewart, the guy with the blonde ponytail, there was actually an episode where he talked about making something to keep things cool that involved unglazed ceramic like flower pots and a layer of sand, and it works through the same principle as these. The water seeping through and evaporating off of the ceramic cools what's inside. Learning that gave me a fresh perspective on the Egyptian texts saying, these cool waters are the Eye of Horus, because I always wondered, well, this is a desert in ancient times, they had no concept of refrigeration. How are the waters cool? Was it just kind of a relative thing? Well, they might have actually been cool if they were in an unglazed ceramic container like this. In fact, that's one of the reasons why these things are used for mixed drinks and things like that today in Mexico. Now, these Cantaritos did come on the label with a Prop 65 warning, which, for those of you who don't live in the United States, that's Proposition 65. That was something that was passed in California in the 80s, and is the reason why you might read a label for something and it says this contains, in this case, DEHP, a phthalate chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer, reproductive harm, da-da-da. Sometimes, you read this and it's like, okay, there's some bad stuff in here. A lot of modeling supplies come with that because of the chemicals that are used to strip paint and this, that, and the other. But sometimes they get put on things because, well, there's a chemical in here that if you feed it to laboratory rats, at high doses over a long period of time, yeah, they're going to get cancer. Well, since this mentioned lead, I said, let's do a lead test on these, because you can buy those, in a hardware store, and see what we find out. One problem, though. Our illustrious quarantine member, Morgan, didn't hit record when we were actually doing the lead test, and so I had to tell him about this later. You remember when we did the lead test on these?
Yeah.
You weren't recording when we actually did the lead test, Parker.
I'm so sorry.
But in the end, we found out it didn't turn red. There was no lead in here. So we soaked them and made pina coladas. We did come up with some very funny outtakes, though, and those are on Patreon. Now, getting back to these altar images, in order to understand them, as we mentioned a moment ago, they're stylized. One of the ways that the Egyptians tended to stylize things was with their perspective. They wanted you to be able to see everything that they put on their offering table, because being able to see it clearly meant that it would be recorded and could be perpetuated into eternity. And so that helps us a lot, now trying to understand it. But you could have, a top view and a side view, all in the same image in Egyptian art. That's why figures tended to look the way they did. But that also means that something that would be placed on an offering tray, they would picture it as if the tray were on its side, and the items were somehow done like this. So think of it as an elaborate hieroglyph. It's not meant to show you like a still life like we're thinking of. It's meant to encode for you all of the items that would be there. So in this example, you have a round tray filled with figs and pomegranates, and it would in real life be sitting flat, but they picture it on its side so that you can see all of the figs and the pomegranates, and oh, that's what's being offered. One other thing that I decided to do, especially for these, because I noticed in a lot of these images there are garlands around the jars of liquid and sometimes around the tray itself. And these garlands, like this example that I made here, the real ones would have been made of petals from Egyptian blue lilies, also called the blue lotus, as well as the white lily. Of course, in ancient times, they had the, marshes along the riverbanks, there's things, they must have bloomed by the thousands, judging by their artwork and how many of them they were able to, offer. But the funny thing is, today, there are certain places where it's actually illegal to possess the Egyptian blue lily. If you live in Russia, Poland, or Latvia, you could face jail time, and in Latvia, I believe it's actually considered a Schedule I drug. Why is this? Well, there happen to be certain chemicals in the Egyptian blue lily that are psychotropic. You can basically get high off of these things, apparently. And it's thought that the ancient Egyptians might have gotten high off of these things. And that's why we can't have nice things now. But, and in countries where you can buy it, like here in the United States, you better shell out some dough because it averages out to about $10 an ounce. So yeah, I made this with paint and blue ribbon and some beadwork, stuff like that. Compare it with what you'll see it in actual practice, and that's another example of something that was done in ancient times isn't really practical to do now, unless you make a facsimile. Another thing about the icon statues that I use in the altar setup, I used one that was stone, one that was clay that I made myself, and one that was bronze. And that's because those are the kinds of materials they would have had in ancient times. Now what's funny is about 15 years ago, when I was on the forums for the House of Nature, there were some folks that were advocating that you only use those kinds of materials because resin was somehow ritually unclean because it's made from oil derivatives, and so that's, dead critters, and ritually unclean or something like that. Again, nice sentiment. I don't know if they're still trying to, push in that direction, but it's not very practical for most of us. Because if you're only going to use, for one, metal is very expensive. The only reason why I happen to have a bronze Anubis is because a friend of mine happened to be working casting in bronze at one point, and that was actually a piece that she said didn't come out right. And I look at him like, are you kidding? This thing's beautiful. But, she gave it to me, and so, it's on my altar, and, if I ever had somebody break into the house, if I picked it up and took a step into the swing, I'd probably, at the very least, knock them unconscious with it because it's very heavy. And of course, if you're going with things that are hand sculpted in clay, then you have a broad range of level of, skill and detail and so forth in it. Now there are some folks that do make clay statues, and some of them are really nice. But another thing you have to worry about is shipping too. And these days, if you're shipping international, you better be patient. So there we have it. The altar that we came up with is certainly very pretty, but it took a long time to set everything up and get it together. And as you also noticed, there were challenges with, picking some of the right things to use. So you have issues of availability, and especially with the garlands, and that took a long time just to make those. That was one of the pre-production elements that, I spent most of December working on. So if you're going to go total recon, you're going to have to make some concessions no matter what you do. My suggestion would be, if you're going to try to do that, if you're, intrepid enough to say, well, let me do a traditional Egyptian altar, save that for big Egyptian, Kemetic liturgical feasts like Egyptian New Year's, the Opet feast, the Osiris mysteries, something, major like that. Do your really traditional altar then, because that makes it more special and, can really put you in that frame of mind, rather than try to make that your everyday bar. I would not suggest that at all unless you just literally had nothing else to do all day. And, quarantines or not, I don't think any of us have nothing else to do all day. So, it's a great thing to try, but again, understand that, there are some things that, you're going to be very limited on, so save that for special occasions. And, who knows, that could end up becoming, it could build sort of a look for, a big holiday altar, as then you start to see, like the palm leaves and the dates and figs and, things like that. And, these little guys, you could, break these out for the big holidays. So again, thank you so much for the Cantoritos. These have been really awesome. Gave me some great material to work with. Also, I'll show you something I just got in the mail today. This is onyx agarite, I believe. Yeah, it's actual onyx, and it is meant to be a tea light candle holder. But I look at it, and it also looks like it could be, it kind of reminds me of another type of offering slab. And by the way, something else, you figure out very quickly working with ancient materials, stone is very heavy. You could take this thing and practically do curls with it. So that's why most ancient Egyptians were rather skinny, is because they did a lot of work. But these things have been really awesome, and I look forward to making more videos and doing more fun stuff with that. So let's look forward to even more good things in 2021. Thank you as always for tuning in and staying with us through all of this, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. So for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon wishing you Synapti.
Enjoyed this video? Then be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Kemetic Independent channel. You can also buy my books on lulu.com and shop for pagan supplies in my Etsy store. Check the description for links. And special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Join us for updates, outtakes, and exclusive videos only on Patreon.